Protests appear to be the order of the day if you watch the national news. Or maybe you'd like your own entourage with paparazzi, security, and a crowd of admirers. Well, I've discovered just where you can get it. Call Adam Swart. He invented the idea in 2012. Adam, welcome to the truth. Tell us the truth today.
I promise I will, John. Great to be with you and your listeners.
So when I was in college, Vietnam protests were pretty much commonplace, but they were genuine. There was, to my knowledge, they were not, protesters were not paid to be there. They were not encouraged to be there. They just organically showed up and protested what was considered to be an illegitimate and a wrong war, a wrong expenditure of U.S. taxpayer dollars. And
Right.
really, I think that war was ended not by the politicians, but more by the college students who really did take to the streets, who marched on Washington. Five of them paid the ultimate price at Kent State University on the tragic day that the National Guard opened fire on students. It was a low day in American history. But the point is, it was real. Today, I'm not so sure. We see protests in Seattle, in Atlanta, Washington after the George Floyd debacle. And now we see protests at Tesla stores with people spray painting Tesla cars and keying people's personal properties. And you think, and you probably know, that these are paid protesters. Have I got it right?
Well, let's unpack it from start to finish here because that was a lot. So let's talk about the Vietnam protests, right?
Mm.
So yes, I think first of all, there's kind of misinformation that there's this organic versus astroturf. So there's organic, which is you're not paid, you're genuine, and astroturf means you're busting, you don't really care a lot about the issue at all. The reality is in America, there's always been money behind politics. There's always been incentives behind why people do what they do. And the idea that that this is some new thing is maybe something I disagree with, right? I mean, I think a lot of these guys who were protesting in Vietnam, yeah, they were passionate about Vietnam, but it was also literally a sex fest, right? So people like these Woodstock and all that, it was literally a sex party. All these people were like smoking weed, having sex. It was a one big orgy. So like, yeah, they were there to oppose Vietnam, but they were there for a lot of other reasons too, personal reasons.
Okay, so I got to call you out on that, Adam. I
Okay.
don't think you were there during the Vietnam protest.
I'm a little young for it.
Exactly. That is my point. I, on the other hand, was there.
Okay.
My college roommate was photographed protesting outside a federal building in Washington. He knows that he had an FBI file open on him because he was a protester, but he was there out of passion and desire, not because of money nor greed. Now, I, on the other hand, was at the Byron Pop Festival, which was actually larger than Woodstock, and
Huh.
it was just outside of Macon, Georgia, and a couple 100,000 people were there. Now, that I didn't participate in the festival. I was there because I'm an entrepreneur and I'm a capitalist, and I was there out of pure greed. I operated an ice cream truck, but my job was actually to pick up the money and take it back to town and deposit it in the bank. And it was tens of thousands of dollars. That's a story for another day. But my point is, I was at the Byron Pop Festival, bigger, badder than Woodstock. And believe me, I saw it all. And so everything that you said is correct, but you confuse the two. The Vietnam War protests were not about sex, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll were Woodstock and the Byron Pop Festival. Vietnam protests were Kent State, Washington, and I challenge you and disagree with you that there was anything paid about it. I think it was totally um, organic. My brother happened to have been in ROTC on the Ohio Wesleyan campus in
Sure.
the late 60s. And he was mocked and tormented when he would wear his ROTC uniform to class. All right.
Sure.
I've filibustered enough. I'll let you retort.
No, no, no. I appreciate that. I appreciate your perspective. What I would say is this: that this idea that, like, let's talk about what makes something a genuine protest, because I think maybe some of the misinformation online about Crowds on Demand, my company, and what we do is kind of centered on this idea that what we do is somehow manipulative and somehow kind of not genuine, right? So let me just first say that everyone who attends a Crowds on Demand event is passionate about the cause that they're espousing, right? So we make sure that they are passionate about the cause. Now, we do compensate them. But what we find is if you don't compensate them, and I don't in any way disagree that your roommate and anyone else who was in the Vietnam protests were passionate about what was going on in Vietnam. Um, However, what I would say is that when there's a reason why a lot of those people were college students, right, who were protesting, right? Because right now, if you don't get paid, who is able to protest, right? Retirees, college students, people with flex work jobs, right, like tech industry, people who don't have kids, so you don't have to arrange childcare, right? So those people are all currently overrepresented at protests because essentially the cost for them to attend a protest is minimal. Now, do you know who's underrepresented at protests? People who work at McDonald's, people who are hourly wage workers, right? Someone who owns a taco stand, right? Those people, housekeepers, whatever. Those people are not able to participate. Now, we at Crowds on Demand give those people the ability to participate because we pay them to attend a protest that they support. So now you can take time off because most hourly people don't get time off. If they take time off, it's unpaid, right? We essentially compensate them essentially so that they can go and take that time off.
I'm going to get back to crowds on demand, but
Sure.
again, I've got to. Much of what you say is correct. The
Mhm.
college kids have flexibility, flexibility of time, but again, you weren't there. I was.
Yeah.
58,000 Americans. Those college kids you're talking about, 58,000 died in fighting the Vietnam War, which was without a purpose or an end. So
Yes.
the people that you're talking about who protested because they had time, they didn't protest because they were idle and had, it wasn't the devil's workshop. It was there because they were protesting their friends and family who went to a war that didn't come home. I know those people. I knew many of them. And I was that far from having been drafted into the Vietnam War myself. So that's a different perspective than what you're giving us. But all right, go to it. What protest have you sponsored or that people here may have watched on television or seen reported on the news that your people showed up for?
Sure. Well, we don't talk about everything, but I'll give you one example that your listeners would probably enjoy, which is the delete Facebook hashtag delete Facebook. So one thing that right wing, left wing all kind of agree is that Facebook, Zuckerberg, whatever, is kind of an evil corporation. Whether it's people on the right, they don't really trust Silicon Valley, they think it's liberal. Right? People on the left, they don't trust big corporations, and they know that Facebook has been manipulated, against them, right? So what we were brought in to do is host a series of rallies and a awareness campaign called delete Facebook, hashtag delete Facebook across the country, 17, 18, and 19, around sort of when it became known that Facebook was kind of selling user data and using it to allow people to divide the country and doing even worse things like than that abroad, even causing a genocide in Myanmar, right? So we highlighted all of that through our campaign, and it was actually so effective that they changed their name. They don't go by Facebook anymore; they call themselves Meta.
Are you claiming responsibility for that?
Not 100%. I think I'm sure there were other factors, but I think that we were part of why that occurred, which is essentially the Facebook name is so associated with essentially division, with Americans turning against one another, that they wanted to change their name to disassociate themselves from it. So I don't blame them for that. And the second policy that they changed was making it very hard to do political advertising on their site, because they realized that that advertising was giving them a lot of really bad publicity. So to focus more on commercial. Now, I'm not going and defending Facebook current or present activities either, but what I'm saying is that that's kind of an example of the type of campaign that we do that has real impact positively in the world.
Okay, so what do you for? There's a lot I want to unpack now. What do you attribute Facebook's motives to be in terms of dividing Americans?
It's a profit motive. I mean, their whole motive is they have these algorithms. They make money when you are on their platform as much as possible and engaging as much as possible, right? So if essentially somebody can sell, and the more they know about you, the more they can sell you the ads, whether it's commercial ads or political ads, that essentially have the highest dollar amount. So the more they know about you, the more they could sell ads at a higher dollar amount. Because think about it this way,
Okay, I
John.
got that. I no, I totally got that. That they are a for-profit company, and they
Correct.
derive. They don't charge for subscriptions, so their revenue stream is derived from ads. All right, fine. Help me understand. You just said a moment ago that you were proud of the work that you had done with hashtag delete Facebook because they were dividing the American people. Connect
Correct.
the dots for me and help me understand how dividing the American people traces back to a profit motive. I'm not feeling it.
Okay, well, let me explain the algorithms that they have, right? So they have these algorithms that make money based on user information. So they want you engaged as much as possible, because the more you're, as you correctly said, John, you as a user are their product that they then sell to advertisers. So the more they know about you, and the more you're on their platform, then the more they can sell. So if they can use people, and people tend to respond more to divisive political content than they do to inane political content. So something that's kind of facts based, not right, not left journalism isn't going to engage people. What's going to engage people is the video, even fake videos of here is what our this group is doing, right? You know, here's what Muslims are doing to America. Here's what Latinos are doing to America. Here's what liberals are doing to America. Here's what Trump supporters are doing to America. And something that taps into your preconceived notions, such as, you know, let's just say the Jussie Smollett incident, right, as an example. So they want to send you those videos. It doesn't matter, like in the case of Jussie Smollett, whether it's true or false, right? So that's how they make money, is the more they keep you on the platform. Those videos, that content keeps you
Okay, so
on.
I think I understand your point. You're saying they basically poke the beehive because people
Correct.
are drawn to the buzz, if you will allow the metaphor to continue.
That's correct.
All right, I can relate to that. So we saw a lot of rioting after George Floyd died. And we saw it in Portland, Seattle, Atlanta, Washington, other prominent cities around the world. And we saw burning, looting, and destruction of property and injury to people. Do you maintain or do you believe that those were paid protests?
I think there was a lot of money behind that, those efforts. So let me explain it in the context of Russian dolls, right? So let's just say there's some billionaire, right, who wants to create chaos on our streets. The billionaire is not going to go address the crowd and say, let's create chaos on our streets, right? That wouldn't make any sense. They didn't become a billionaire by being stupid. They would create a foundation. The foundation would fund advocacy groups. The advocacy groups would fund academic programs that might create fellowships where those people do what they're doing. Maybe they fund dummy corporations to pay cash to people who are throwing Molotov cocktails. So you create 5, 6, 7 layers of essentially division between the billionaire or whoever's funding it and what's going on the street. So yeah, they are being funded, and let me give you some more evidence that they are funded. Right. Number one, this is pertaining to some of the more recent protests. There was tactical gear. Tactical gear is very expensive. There was someone distributing off a truck, hundreds of tactical gear, right? So that is someone's paying that bill, right? That's not free, right? Legal fees that are being paid for the protesters, that's not free, right? The organization, the permits, the sound systems, right? All of those things are essentially money. So yeah, there's funding. Now, let me just say though that the fact that there's money behind a protest does not mean it is illegitimate. So I think we slightly misinterpreted one another when we were talking about the Vietnam protesters, because I wasn't trying to in any way delegitimize them. What I was saying is there can be money behind a cause and the people can care about a cause.
And trust me, Adam, I didn't call you on here so that I could argue with you about Vietnam. It's just that you
Sure,
triggered me with a couple of things that you said, and I
sure.
think, and I was trying to draw a line between a organic protest that comes out of passion versus one that comes out of opportunism and money.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
I think, and we'll get to it as we unpack this a little bit, but I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, that Crowds on Demand is a for profit venture.
That's
And
correct.
are you agnostic when it comes to politics? Liberal, conservative, Republican,
I
Democrat?
tend to be pretty
Are you
independent.
for? Are you for Israel or Pakistan? I mean, do you care about any of the issues, or are you strictly there for the mighty dollar?
So two things, right? So I'm politically independent, right? So I grew up as a Democrat. I worked most of my college life as a Democrat, right? But now I'm independent because the Democratic Party has lost its way. So I don't ascribe to the Democratic Party. I don't support the Republican Party. We work with conservatives. We work with liberals. We not on the opposite side of the same issue, but I like to work on the side of common sense. So I will admit to you, John, when I started my business, I was empowered completely by the almighty dollar. If somebody is willing to pay me to do something and it's legal, no problem, we'll do it. Now I've been in business 13 years. I'm a little bit more selective on what I take on. I like to be on the side of common sense. Now, that is subjective. What is common sense? It's what I say it is, right? So, because it's my business. So, there are areas where I think that the Democrats are on the side of common sense, such as I don't think people should die because they don't have access to health care in this country. I think that's wrong. I think everyone has the right to health care.
When you say that you're not in favor of depriving people of health care, guess
Yes.
what? I am a conservative, card carrying member of the Republican Party, and neither am I.
Yep.
Here's where you lose me though. Healthcare is not a right. And I'm all in favor of helping people that need help. What I'm
Mhm.
not in favor of is helping people that won't help themselves. Where do you
Sure.
draw the line? Who has got to draw the line? I think
Sure.
right now that we've swung way too far over to socialism, and I think Donald Trump is trying to bring us back. I'm all about teaching the man to fish if he will fish for himself. But I'm not in favor of giving the man fish and having him become dependent on society for his existence, because that leads to low self esteem, which leads to crime and bitterness.
And I oppose the welfare state. And I think, for example, one area where Republicans are in the side of common sense is in the area of police. Like, no one wants to defund the police nonsense, right? So obviously that makes no sense. Obviously you didn't have me on to talk about healthcare, but I will just throw out one other point. Yes,
Yeah, no, let's go. Let's do it.
I agree with that, but even if the man refuses to fish, I don't think he should starve. So you say teach the man to fish. I say yes, teach the man to fish. But if he refuses to fish, then give him some protein powder and some water so he doesn't starve.
I'll give you protein powder and water, but I just fundamentally disagree with you. I think that you're recreating the laws of nature, and I happen to have this paradigm that God put us here to learn. And
I don't want to work where it's safe.
you know how the saying goes, "No good deed goes unpunished."
Yes, I've found
I used to think that that's just like a colloquialism that's kind of funny on one side, but true on the other. I really kind of think that God set it up that way, that, you
that.
know, He's in charge of teaching men how to live. And when we try to intervene by propping them up, it's not God's will, I don't believe. But I do think God would want us to help our fellow man when
Yeah,
they're in a place of need and desperation.
yes,
I'm all about it. I've worked for the last 15, well, I worked for 15 years, not the last 15 years, but I've unfortunately gotten away from it because of geographical divides. But I worked in the inner city in Atlanta, the worst zip code in America for every social ill you can define. And so I'm perfectly uh, in favor of helping people. I am not in favor of propping them up
I
when they
agree.
refuse to help themselves. So that may be
Makes
where you and I agree, but we don't know where to draw that line.
I think it's about where you draw the line. And
Yeah.
for example, I believe that drug addicts on the streets of Atlanta or San Francisco or LA should be forced to seek treatment or go elsewhere because you can't shoot up on my streets. That's never going to happen. That's not going to fly. Right? That's common sense. No,
Well, and then that's a libertarian view, and I actually subscribe to that. I think that people should be free to live their lives as they see fit.
but not on our
They
streets.
they can engage in sexual promiscuity. They
Yep.
can engage in taking illegal drugs.
Yep.
They can what else can they do? They can eat until they're obese. They can
Yes.
eat candy until their teeth fall out. But
Yep.
here's where you and I probably are going to disagree. I
Yep.
am not willing to pay for the methadone program. I am
No.
not willing to pay for the diabetes treatment. I am not willing to pay for the health care that they have brought into their own lives. And I don't think God wants us to.
So I think if you're saying, hey, we should educate people better, I completely agree. I completely agree. People need to be educated, and sometimes that needs to be through tougher methodology, right? And I completely think that when you see these drug addicts on the street, in California in particular, it's just absurd, right? What's being allowed to happen, right? That they're shooting up right next to kids in the parks, right? And that there needs to be zero tolerance for that, and they need to receive treatment mandatory. Um, and the my challenge is and this is probably my bleeding heart liberal thing coming in is I just don't like the idea of people dying on the streets. You know what I mean? And I just even if they're making dumb choices, I still think we need to save them. You know what I mean? And that's maybe you and I disagree on that. So that's why I said I'm not a liberal. I'm not a conservative. My liberal side is comes out in this regard. Like even if you're an overeater, even if you're a smoker, and if you smoked 10 packs a day for 20 years and you basically are coming in with lung cancer, yeah, you caused your lung cancer, but we should still help you. I'm sorry, we should still provide a doctor to help get you through it. I'm sorry, I'm not going to let that person die. That if you and I disagree about that, that's okay. I respect your point of view, but that's my opinion.
No, I actually do agree with what you said. I would not withhold care from someone who is in desperation. I would help rehabilitate their health and hopefully rehabilitate their state of mind. But at some point, and I wrestled with this uh, in my own mind.
Yeah.
Where do you draw that line
Yes.
between helping them and enabling them? And
Enabling.
that is the line that I'm trying to always search for. And I've done
That's
that
a good.
with my own kids. I mean, they're adults now, and I'm very proud of them. But when they were teenagers, they're all boys, three boys, and they're all boys. I mean, one of them used to climb up the gutter at 2 in the morning to sneak in after he had snuck out. And so I wrestled with discipline and love. I think
Yes,
every parent wrestles with that line. And my wife erred on the side of enabling. I erred on the side of discipline. In a
sure.
broader social context, I think the same principles apply. So
Agreed.
I don't think there's a hard and fast answer to it. And the fact that you do have a big heart actually kind of endears you to me and our listeners. So no apology necessary. But let's get back to the crowds on demand conversation that we originally started this with. So you're agnostic. You will provide a crowd for any um, political persuasion or cause, if I understand you
If
correctly.
it has a common sense bent to it. So there are things that we won't do, right? We won't work with hate groups. We won't. I try to focus on targeting powerful interests, right? Not targeting down. I don't. My mom always taught me don't hit down, hit up, right? So if you're upset, I mean, I'll give you an example. You're upset in an airline, because your flight was canceled. You don't yell at the flight attendant or customer service. You'll yell at the CEO of the airline who scheduled the flights that way, right? So my kind of feeling is I like to focus on events that where we're targeting city council, the Senate, Congress, big corporations, major interests, and trying to persuade. Number one, the other thing I really like to do is persuade. Like everything that we take on, I don't want it to just create noise and be screaming at people. That doesn't work. I want to persuade. So what I always ask my clients is, how are we, and sometimes I'll try to answer that for them, how are we going to persuade the person who either doesn't know about the issue or sees the issue from the other perspective, right? Can we get them a little bit over to our side rather than just yelling? I mean, so when it comes to Israel, Palestine, there's just so much yelling, and I didn't see anybody being convinced, right? It was just, here's why our side is good and your side is evil, and here's why, and vice versa.
Well, their side is evil because they slaughtered 200 people at a music festival, and they
Sure.
killed pregnant women, and they cut off the heads of young children, babies. So you want compassion. So do I.
Yeah.
But when Hamas commits these atrocities, it deprives me of
Yeah.
feeling any compassion towards them
I have
whatsoever.
no compassion for
It,
Hamas.
it, it is complete annihilation at that point. It is genocide
Right.
against Hamas. On that, I side with Israel. Now, if they want to come to the table and they want to stop the atrocities, start by
Yeah.
releasing the hostages, and then
Yes.
we'll talk about rehabilitation and rebuilding. But
Yeah.
until then, it is all out war and destruction, according to John and according to Netanyahu. I'm sorry.
Well, I'll push back a little bit. So I agree
No,
100% when it comes to
no.
Hamas. There's no mercy for those people. They're killers. They're evil, right? And what the intelligent way that Israel has gone after them, like with the pagers, but that was Hezbollah, but those type of things, I completely condone. I mean, these are evil people. I mean, to take those hostages and do what they did, and that was just the most recent of the heinous crimes. So I have no sympathy. I do have sympathy for the people of Palestine who are suffering. Who, again, the Israeli far right can say, "Oh, well, they voted for Hamas." Okay, but ultimately, I'm not blaming the civilians. They're women, children, whole families that have been wiped out. And it's important to note that the Israeli cabinet, some of the far right ministers in Israel, have basically said, no, we do want to cleanse Gaza of all the people. We want them all out so that we can build this sort of kind of biblical vision of Israel, right? So when they are saying that, which is, to me, that's very troubling because it indicates that their objective is not security and rather that their objective is to do something that would displace all these people, right? So I don't agree with that. I agree 100% Israel has the right to defend itself, but I disagree in this particular regard, and I think that
And Adam, so do I.
yeah,
I think that here again, we're just talking about our own perspectives.
yeah,
But the Ku Klux Klan committed heinous acts in the United States in the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Yep.
So it is very understandable that black people would think that all white people must be sympathetic to the Ku Klux Klan.
Correct.
Just like a lot of white people make the same mistake where it comes when it comes to the Black Panthers, who were a violent organization in the 60s and 70s, by stereotyping all black people as
Yeah.
violent and bad.
Yes.
I think we're doing the same thing with
Yes.
Palestine, and we're confusing, as you correctly point out, the differences between Hamas and Palestinians. And
Yes.
so when I say uh, wipe them out, I am specifically and exclusively referring to the members of Hamas who
Yes.
are demonic, evil people, because
I
I don't know a solution short of that.
no.
Because
I don't.
we've tried
Yep.
for 20 years. We've tried a Palestinian state, and we're
Yep.
going to go to neutral corners. We're going to live independently. The problem is the Palestinian people are poor. And,
Yes.
when you're poor and you don't have options, you knee jerk go to desperation, and those are not always good choices. And
No.
so I think that some members of the Palestinian people have aligned with Hamas, and therein lies their mistake.
Out of
I think
desperation.
Trump actually sees that and
Yes.
wants the United States to go in and be a key peacekeeper, drive Hamas out, but create a Palestinian place where
Yeah.
people can live and provide subsistence to them so they can have meaningful, safe lives. I like that.
Yeah, and far be it for me to diagnose the root of middle conflict in the Middle East, which has been going on for many, many
Yeah,
years,
me either.
before us both, and after us both, probably. But the unfortunate part is that, and I'm very privy to this in my business, is you have an industry on both the Hamas, as you said, but also the Israel far right and certain people in this America that actually want to keep this conflict going, whether it's for profit or for their own political opportunism, right? So if there was peace, they would sabotage it, right? So there's a reason why people like Anwar Sadat in Egypt was assassinated by a radical Muslim Brotherhood, I believe it was. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think that's
But
right.
also Yitzhak Rabin, the peacemaker Israeli prime minister, was assassinated by a far right Israeli, right, who didn't want peace. So you have these groups on both the far right in Israel and the terrorists in the Palestinian area, right? And they don't want peace, and because if there were peace, they would not have relevancy politically. So, and Netanyahu is a political opportunist of the highest caliber, and he sees in this an opportunity get out of his own legal challenges, right, for this bribery case and other things, right? So he likes what's going on because it gets him out of his political problems, because that really is what he doesn't want to talk about. Is his criminal case, right? Which was, by the way, was filed against him by his own attorney general. So this wasn't some sort of political kind of witch hunt of Netanyahu. So I think it's unfortunate, but and I'm not trying to set any kind of equivalency. I think there's no moral equivalency between Netanyahu and Hamas, because Netanyahu, while I think he's done a lot of bad things, has not purposefully murdered civilians, while Hamas has. But I do think both of them have a real interest in this war continuing.
Well, I don't profess to be an expert on the Middle East. It's far too
Yeah,
convoluted and complex for my simple brain to understand it in depth.
yep,
Um, you know, Netanyahu's been around a long time. I think the Israeli people really do appreciate him. I do think that he is a patriot for his country and wants to have a secure country for he and his people to live in. And
hmm
I'll leave it at that. But let's get back. We can start talking about crowds on demand, and then we get sucked into these side issues, which I enjoy talking about.
me too.
But do you believe that the protests that we saw, let's get back to it, after George Floyd, were those organic or were they sponsored? You know your you know your competition, right? I mean, you're in this business, so you certainly know your competition, I'm thinking.
Well, let me give you a story. So back in around 2015, I was approached by some of the organizers of the Black Lives Matter. A lot of people think BLM started in 2020. It started in 2015. Um, and they were saying, we want to create this. This was after what happened to Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown in Ferguson, and Trayvon Martin, I think it was in Florida, right? And they said, we want to launched like a movement to empower the Black community. And I said, I am 100% on board. Here's what I think we should do. We should focus on economic empowerment and make the Black community into a independent, non-aligned voting bloc, right? Because the fact that they've been aligned with the Democratic Party has actually reduced their power. So I said, let's make the whole emphasis on ownership and wealth, right? Which is ultimately when you talk to ordinary Black folks, that's what they want. They want ownership, they want wealth, because they've been denied it in this country for so long for various reasons, right? So
All right, now
that,
Adam, we're going on a fork in the road again. What my question is very simple. Were the BLM the responses to George Floyd, were they organic or were they sponsored? It's not a complicated question.
they were sponsored. They were sponsored. And a lot of the list of sponsors are companies that you know about. Amazon, for example, as my understanding, was a donor to Black Lives Matter, right? A lot of major companies were. And there were two reasons that they did it. Number one, I think there was this genuine outpouring, and there was a genuine outpouring of outrage after what happened to George Floyd among a lot of people across the political spectrum. I mean, even
I didn't like what happened to George Floyd. I mean,
I mean,
any living human with a conscience and a moral
yes,
compass of right and wrong has to be able to watch that video and
I
say
think
this is wrong. I
yes,
mean, you got six cops standing around one drug crazed person, and he's saying, "I can't breathe. Take your damn knee off his
it's
neck."
offensive
I mean,
police
it's
brutality.
insanity. I think my problem with that is I don't think we know the truth. I
No,
don't believe that what we saw on that video tells the whole story.
true.
Floyd and that cop, whatever his name was, I can't
Totally,
remember it right now, knew
totally.
each other because they were both bouncers at a nightclub and they had gone back. They went back years. I think that it was murder and I think it was intentional, but I don't think it was because George Floyd stole a Twinkie from the convenience store.
Well,
That's
I
just
also
what I suspect. I don't have proof.
I think it's very interesting. I mean, I don't want to get on a tangent with this, but I
Yeah,
would
I know
say
we're going down another path.
another tangent. But what I would say is this, right? Companies, there was a lot of people. What I was saying is there's a genuine outpouring of a lot of genuine sentiment by a lot of people who said this is outrageous that someone can be basically murdered in the street by an officer of the law who's supposed to protect people, right? So I think some of it was genuine, but then a lot of it is what I call protection money. So a lot of major corporations paid BLM because essentially they don't want those rioters showing up on their streets, right? Outside
Right.
Amazon or Google or Facebook or whatever the case may be. BlackRock, all these companies, and I don't know specifically which ones specifically donated and how much, but basically it's a who's who of the wealthiest people in America and the wealthiest companies in America gave money to BLM. So if you're asking if it's sponsored, of course it was sponsored. Now, a lot of these people were genuinely outraged, but I think a lot more of that money was basically like, hey, don't come after us because it's I mean, when we're in 2025 and we're in sort of a right-wing purge, it's hard to put ourselves into 2020 where there was a left-wing purge, right? And I oppose purges from all sides, right? But there was basically anyone who would like professor there was a professor who basically said, I don't agree with the method of Black Lives Matter, and he was fired, right? Corporate executives who would donate to certain candidates would be fired, right? There was a purge going on. So a lot of corporations donated to BLM such as in hope, the same way that you'd pay protection money to the mafia, is essentially we don't want to be the target of your ire. Right. So, yeah, I mean, if you're asking whether it was sponsored, yes, number one, it was sponsored. Number two, a lot of the people who were there were genuine. But number three, a lot of the people were there to flex on Instagram. I mean, a lot of the cast members of the Real Housewives franchise, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, were out there at the BLM protests. And I always say, do you think they know anything about institutional racism or police brutality? I mean, give me a effing break, right? These women were there to post on social media to seem like they were woke, right? And with the cause. So the reality is it's complex, but there was a lot of money behind BLM. Doesn't mean that BLM had no merit whatsoever.
Adam, you've talked about everybody except the organizations that I would expect you to talk about, i.e., the NGOs, where a lot of federal money flows, and I think they are behind a lot of these protests, and none other than George Soros. Now, why have you not mentioned him by name?
Well, I don't want to get a cease and desist letter from his lawyers. Um, but
You're scared. Well, Donald Trump isn't scared. He's named him a person of interest, and he's going to go after him as
well, let me
someone who is engaged in treasonous activity, I believe.
Well, let me put it this way. I do not, there's a lot of, first of all, a lot of people are taking money from Soros without even knowing it. So that's one thing, is that you have to understand that, and not just Soros, a lot of other billionaires, they have this web. Remember, I was talking earlier about Russian dolls. There was money that is flowing from Soros. He's probably funding right-wing organizations too. I mean, what his motivations are
No, I
very
mean, whoa, whoa, whoa. What would possibly lead
okay.
you to make
You
a
want to know?
statement like that? He is the Antichrist for
Okay,
conservative.
that's what you think. But let me just go to how. So, what is the reason why George Soros is? So, the best hypothesis for Soros is he makes money through chaos, right? So, when there is chaos, so the way how did you know how he became a billionaire?
I really don't.
So he became a billionaire, in my understanding, is he essentially made a ton of money based on the collapse of the British pound. So essentially, the British economy, their monetary system was collapsing, and he bet it would collapse, and that is how his hedge fund made all that money, right? So the better explanation than he's some sort of leftist, right? He's a billionaire. His motives are profit seeking, right? So he wants chaos. He will fund whoever is bringing the chaos that he can then use to short the market, right? So yeah, I mean, he of course there's a lot of information out there that he's funded leftist organizations, but can you prove that he is not in some way also funding right wing organizations?
I have heard and read zero evidence of that. What I have read and what I do believe is that he hates this country. He wants to change the fabric of America, as Barack Obama said that he wanted to do. And we know that Soros has funded Obama and his campaigns. And that's what I take them at their word. I take them at face value. I,
I'm just a question for you. So do you know who Scott Bessent is? The
You mean the
Secretary.
Secretary of the United States Treasury who used to
Yeah,
work for George Soros?
George Soros, and he was a top lieutenant for George Soros. Why would Trump hire Soros's top lieutenant? I mean, I'm just asking you sincere question.
Maybe because he's brilliant, maybe because he's honest, and maybe because he's good at what he does. The fact that someone worked for,
If he was all the evil, if Trump hated Soros as much as he said, why? I mean, you then after the end of World War II, the United States didn't hire a bunch of people who worked for Hitler, right? And Hitler probably had people who were evil but very intelligent working for him. Right. So I mean, I just do think it's curious that the Secretary of the Treasury was one of Soros's top lieutenants for a very long time. Is that not curious?
Adam, you're saying guilt by association.
No, I'm not saying anything.
That is not a sustainable thought process.
I'm saying it's
I
worth
worked for a
examining.
law firm for 5 years when I
Sure.
started my career. One
Yeah.
of the people who I liked the most turned out to have embezzled from the law firm that I
Yeah.
work for. That
Well,
does not make me an embezzler. I'm sorry. You've got two facts. Besant worked for Soros. Soros is evil. That does not mean that Besant is evil. There is a disconnect there.
but Besant
You
worked
sound
for
like a
Soros.
conspiratorialist.
So my question is, no, I mean, I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying that it's. I just find it really curious that Trump hired George Soros, one of George Soros's top lieutenants. I'm not suggesting anything. I just find it really curious that, and it's not
Well,
something that's
you
talked
are
about.
suggesting something by
I didn't
having
suggest.
merely
I
brought it up and making the linkage. Look, I'm curious about it too, but I have
yeah.
seen nothing to support any inference that Scott Bessent is not a masterful Secretary of the U.S. Treasury. Enough said, period. I don't care who he worked for 30 years
Okay.
ago.
Okay, you're entitled. That's fine. Maybe he is a good Secretary of Treasury. I just think it's curious.
Well,
Because
put your investigative hat on and go down that rabbit hole and come back and tell us what you find. I mean,
yeah,
I'm open to receiving information if there
yeah,
is any. I
yeah.
just haven't simply found any other than early on in his career, he worked for an organization that was controlled by George Soros. God help us if that's the grounds for being indicted and
Yeah,
prosecuted.
yeah. Sure. Well. Look, and by the way, just to be clear, I just want to be very clear. I think the influence Soros has had has been very damaging on this country. So I don't want to parse words in that regard. And the biggest thing that he's done that's damaged our country is these DAs. So district attorney races tend to have very little money in them, but he
Yeah.
basically has put a ton of money behind these people who are like, I'm not going to prosecute crime. I'm not going to prosecute any theft. I'm just going to let chaos reign on the streets. And he elected people not just in San Francisco and LA, like George Gascon, right, but also people in places like St. Louis, right, which is not even known as a left wing city, right? So he, you know, so I think that's been really destructive. And of course, the people we were talking about BLM, the people who have been worst affected by it are communities of color and working class people. Because when you're a well-to-do person, you're immune from some of the effects of crime. But if you're working the graveyard shift at a Walgreens, right, at midnight, and some whack job comes in and steals and threatens you, and that person is then arrested but then released back onto the street, that is causes chaos in the community. So I don't disagree with you about Soros, but I don't think we're hearing the full story about Soros. And I think that Soros is funding things on the right as well.
Well, I've seen no evidence of that. If you have any evidence of it, I am certainly open to receiving it. I understand your hypothesis, and you may be right because I have not been able to get inside of George Soros's head to find out what his true motivation is.
He hasn't agreed to come on your show.
Well, first of all,
I would love to
I
see that.
haven't invited him, but I
Yeah,
will. I don't think that he will come, but I will definitely invite him and or his son to come on, and
yeah,
we'll have a good old conversation. But George Soros does have bad motives. I just haven't figured out exactly what they are. You've offered
right.
a hypothesis that I have not heard before, but it does have a certain ring of truth. My suspicion is that he is doing the work of a foreign adversary that is intent on dividing our country. Because I'll just tell you, to me, Black Lives Matter, just the very phrase itself, may be the most divisive phrase that I've ever heard. I mean, it says that Black Lives Matter, but everybody else's lives don't. And
Sure.
but I don't think that was the intent of the people who that are black who say that
Correct.
out of conviction, because I do
Sure.
understand that black people in this country have been denied, persecuted, and been
Yes, they have.
severely mistreated for centuries. I think it is not stopped completely, but it is on the path to betterment. Okay,
Yes,
so we'll have to save that for a whole separate conversation sometime. But the message is not effective, because if the message is for all of us to get along and judge each other by the character and the quality of our hearts rather than the color of our skin, it is totally destructive from that for achieving that goal.
I agree.
So I do think that it has been created out of uh, bad intent and as a means of dividing us as people. And I just don't think we should fall for it. Now,
I
similarly, defund the police is the dumbest thing I have ever heard in my entire life.
Yep.
But the most people, the people who suffered the most from violent crime in the United States are members of the black community.
That's correct. By
Most homicides in Chicago,
yes,
they don't affect white people near as much as they do black people. I think that 90% of the deaths in Chicago that are the result of homicide is black on black crime.
yes,
So defunding the police is lunacy.
it is.
But here's where I think we could find common ground. How about simply hold all people accountable?
I agree.
I don't want to get rid of cops. I just want to hold the bad cops accountable and
Yes,
surgically remove them from the organizations where they defy the laws that they take an oath to uphold. So
yes,
these right leaning phrases and the left leaning phrases, to your point, don't accomplish anything except division.
that's
Let's
correct.
find where the commonality of thought is. I think we can agree that black people should not be unfairly treated. Period.
Yes, yes,
Whether it's by their neighbor or by the police or by an
yes,
institution.
yes.
It's we've got to close that chapter. But saying Black Lives Matter, I'm saying, is not the stepping stone to that objective. Just like I am saying defund the police is not a stepping stone towards reforming the police.
I completely agree with everything you said.
All
On
right,
that, like, could not agree more.
good. Then let's finish with crowds on demand.
Okay.
Are there any crowds that you funded that you regretted?
I think where I regretted it is when in the early part of my business, we did not focus enough on making sure that the people who we had sincerely agreed with the issue. So that led to some bad publicity about around the idea of we're hiring actors and we're bussing in actors to basically say things that they don't necessarily agree with, right? And I have made it my top priority, and I will tell you and your listeners this, John. We have lost money by doing this. Like, this is costing us money to make sure that all of the people at all of our advocacy events sincerely agree with the cause. And it's been my top priority over the past 5 or 6 years to make sure of it personally with every event that we do. And I'll tell
Well,
you,
how do you do that? Do you say, "Hey, I'm going to pay you $100"? Now, you do agree with this protest, right? Is that how you do it?
well, yeah, so we'll basically ask people, hey, do you agree with, are you an environmentalist, right? So then let's just say we're protesting a power plant, right? Maybe we reach out or we already have a network of environmentalists, right? Depending on where, right? And we talk to environmentalists, we get them out there, right? So maybe we talked about the police, right? And crime. Maybe we have people who've been victims of crime who want to talk about how important it is to have police, right? So it's we have ways of doing that, right? And I don't have time to go into all of that now, but we have
Well, give
ways
us
of
the
making
top
sure.
three ways that you vet people to ensure that they are there legitimately and sincerely.
Number one, we look at social media. We have them send us their social media stuff if they're already like active on the issue. Number two, we straight up ask them the question. And number three, we see if they're part of an existing group already, right? And number four, sometimes people will reach out proactively to us or to some of the people who I have working for me, and say, hey, if you have any pro police events in Minneapolis, let me know, right? So I take that as them being pro police, right? Do you see what I'm saying? So
Yeah,
there are
yeah.
more
So
ways.
what I'm hearing you say is that you're only really providing a forum for people to have a voice and to speak out on causes they care about, and
Correct.
you're willing to compensate them along the way so they can afford to leave work or home or whatever
Correct.
it is to do it.
That's correct. That's correct.
Right now,
But that wasn't always
I
the case.
did have George Soros on this show, and I
Okay.
came at him like I've kind of come at you. What do you think he's likely to say?
Well, first of all, I think the likelihood of him coming on your show is is pretty limited.
I
Um,
think you just marginalized me, Adam. How dare you?
well, I
Hey,
don't think I've seen an interview with him in 20 years. So I
I'm
think,
teasing you. I'm teasing you. I agree.
but if you did have him on there, but I like the idea that he should come on there because honestly, I think people would respect him more if he went and came on these interviews and said, "Hey, I'm this is why I'm funding these
Yeah,
campaigns." Right? I think people would actually respect him more if he said, "Here's why I'm doing it, and here's what I'm doing." Right?
I might agree that people would disrespect him maybe marginally less. I
Yeah.
think we'd still end up at disrespect. All right, so um,
So you have Soros on your show.
social media. Yes, George Soros comes on the show, and I ask him, "How dare you fund people that go and cause injury to persons and property and help further divide our already divided country?"
He would say, "I'm not doing that."
And how about you, Adam? Are you doing that? Do you, any of your protests turn violent or end up in damaging persons or property?
Never. I've been doing this 13 years. Never once, and I hope it'll never happen because we not actually we're safer than your average protest. You know why? We compensate people to attend. We vet the people who attend. We often have security on site. We are literally so we've never had an incident. We don't we tell people our one policy that I also did about 5 or 6 years ago was no swearing at our events. So literally you're not even allowed to curse, which is a rule I don't even myself follow some of the time. So we don't let people curse. We don't let people break the law. Like we are actually like respectful advocates for the cause. Like I said, I always tell my clients, I want my people to be brand ambassadors for the cause or your company. Now, I would say that, but the difference between my explanation and perhaps Soros's explanation, because I'm not saying I have no proof that Soros is funding violence, but if he is doing it, it would be several layers removed. The difference is I'm not funding violence or law breaking at any level. There's no levels removed. It's just simply not happening. Our people are there to be peaceful, respectful advocates. Period. Full stop.
For money.
Well, we are compensated to conduct advocacy campaigns and to conduct protests and to conduct publicity stunts. And it's the same way that your advertisers pay money to advertise on your show if you have sponsors, right? It's the same. Yes, that's for money, but I presume that you wouldn't take a sponsor whose product you severely disagreed with. Is that accurate? You seem like a very principled guy.
Well, thank you for that observation, and I will accept the compliment because that is truly how I live my life. Try to live my life as imperfect as a person as we all are. Um,
Yes.
I'll say this, Adam. I was really ready to get down and dirty with you today because the problem that I have, and I don't mean this contentiously or disrespectfully, but the protest lack genuineness when money comes into play.
Mhm.
But I will tell you this: for our radio listeners that are not on the live stream, Adam is a really attractive young guy. Number two, and I'm married 48 years. I don't mean that in any other way other than just as a compliment. You're a nice looking guy, and I've come at you pretty good, and you have not gotten angry, belligerent, or defensive. I think you have been very respectful in your answers, and I find it incredibly difficult to dislike you on any level, which is another way of saying I really like you, Adam, and I appreciate you coming on the show. And I've enjoyed the respectful, candid conversation that we've had
I
today.
like it. That's the only conversation I like to do, and I try to impart that same respect in my business. And when we're doing protests, and sometimes protests, it's a very sensitive issues, but we always try to do it as respectfully as possible, just as we did on this show. And I think we're two people with principles, as you correctly said, imperfect people, maybe, but we are trying to do. I think you're trying to do your best, and I think I'm trying to do our best, and I'm hoping we can. And I know that we haven't that some things that we do don't appear to unite the country, and I'm working on doing more campaigns to bring this country together. And I know you're trying to do the same thing.
That's something I could get on board with. I think the leadership, and look, they're all to blame. Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, liberals. Every chance they've got, they get to unite the country. They end up knee jerk appealing to their base, which loves the fire and brimstone, whether it's conservative or liberal. And I think that therein lies the difficulty. And I don't think that the good old days used to be as bad. I think when Reagan was president and Tip O'Neill was Speaker of the House, they disagreed, but they could have a cocktail after work and
Yep.
have a friendly, cordial relationship with one another. That's what I yearn for, not
Yep.
on so much on for the politicians, but for the country. I
Yes.
think the divisiveness has got to stop, but the leaders have to lead. And the way to do
Yes.
that is not to get reelected, but to bring the country together. Earn your
Yep.
stripes that way.
Maybe open primaries too. I'll throw that out there. It's just as in the end, open primaries that are open where anybody can go run, and the top two advance to the next to the final round, and then people can vote. So you're not running as you're not having Republicans run to the right and Democrats run to the left. You have everybody's competing for every vote.
I'll be down with that if you and George Soros both agree to go to neutral corners and not try and shape opinions by leading protest. That to me lacks a certain degree of genuineness. But I respect you as a person. I respect you as an entrepreneur, as a capitalist, because I'm right in there with you. I love working for the dollar.
Yep.
I don't really like accepting gratuitous gifts, which I really haven't since my parents departed this earth. But I sure am grateful to them for everything they gave me. But just earn it the old fashioned way works for me. And I think that's truly what you are setting out to do.
Trying.
And I wish you well and look forward to having you back on the truth.
Yeah, anytime, John. It was a pleasure. I've loved spending this hour with you and your listeners.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your weekend.
You too. Thanks, John.